Good morning, weather fans. It's Friday Eve. It's a Thursday, September 26th at 7:38 in the morning as I'm recording. Look at the beard. It's kind of growing in. You know, Christmas will be here pretty soon. I've been eating all the wrong foods. No one likes a skinny Santa. Maybe I can pick up some extra work coming up at this December. Anyway, let's get into the forecast. There's so much to cover, and we're going to cover it. The latest on Helene, of course, as a major hurricane is headed for Florida. Here are your hazards across the United States and in the desert Southwest. It's just hot. I mean, it's really hot. So excessive heat warnings here for excessive heat. They hit a new record high yesterday in Tucson. I believe it was 105, breaking the old record of 104. So it's not like it shattered the record, but 105 is hot, especially for this time of year. So more of the same. As you head up into Oregon, a little bit of fog there for the Willamette Valley, up in Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota. Red flag warnings up here for high fire danger with breezy, dry conditions. Even up there in northern Montana, we have some wind advisories, high wind warnings, that sort of thing. I think that's a high wind watch. That's a wind advisory for North Dakota into Minnesota. But the big story, of course, Hurricane Helene, which is now a hurricane. Top winds are at 100 miles an hour, moving to the north-northeast at 12 miles an hour, and expected to make landfall tonight. So we just hurricane warnings, hurricane watches, tropical storm warnings, flood watches, coastal flood warnings, just all of that going on. You know, Florida, Georgia will be hardest hits, but South Carolina, North Carolina, tornado danger, and then all the flooding with all the rain, Tennessee, a little bit of Kentucky, Alabama, northern Mississippi. It's just kind of a mess. So here's the latest on Helene. This is your 7 o'clock Central Time update. So 40 minutes ago, this map was issued, and we're at 100 mile an hour right now, hurricane, moving off to the northeast at 12 miles per hour. And should be a major hurricane later today by the time it makes landfall for tonight. Now, the latest weather discussion was 4 a.m. Central Time, I believe, and they were saying top winds at 115 when it makes landfall. That's down from 120 that they were talking about yesterday. I have seen some forecasts that put it at 130. So somewhere in there, 130 would be a Category 4 hurricane. 115 is a Category 3. Either way, major hurricane, major damage, just going to be unsurvivable, as I put in the thumbnail. Now, why did I do that? Am I just going for clickbait? Am I trying to be overly dramatic, hyperbolic? No, I tend not to do that. Yes, I like clicks and I like views, but I'm not trying to be hyperbolic at all. When you're looking at 15 to 20 feet on your storm surge for the Big Bend of Florida, that is unsurvivable. If you have a house near the coast and it's a 2-story house and you have water that's going into the second floor, not counting the wave action, yeah, you're not going to survive that if you're along the coast. So I know people are getting out of Dodge, and that's a good thing. So get out of Dodge. This is not survivable along the Florida coast when it makes landfall tonight. So no, I was not being hyperbolic with that thumbnail. And even on the Atlantic side, 1 to 3 feet storm surge as enough of an onshore wind coming in as the hurricane makes landfall on the other coast. Still enough of an onshore wind on the Atlantic coast for a storm surge there. Flash flooding percentages are high, of course, near landfall, near Tallahassee, and around that in the Florida Panhandle. At least a 70% chance of flash flooding. Could be devastating flash flooding here. And also look at that north of Atlanta into the mountains of northern Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, a little bit of Tennessee. At least a 70% chance of devastating flash flooding here as well. And even the moderate risk, the 40% risk, widespread. Pretty much almost the entire state of Georgia and the eastern third of Alabama and a large chunk of Tennessee, especially mountainous areas, And so the mountains are going to be pretty dangerous here. We're going to have two things going on. The mountains will help aid the rainfall amounts with orographic lifting. So air has to rise when it hits the mountains. It has no other choice. And rising air causes, more rain. But we're also going to have very gusty winds in the mountains because as you get off of this friction of the surface, you're going to have more dramatic winds. And so high winds in the mountains and a lot of rain in the mountains is going to cause some problems up here from northern Georgia into the mountains of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Here's your rain, the actual rain amounts for the next several days, and we're looking at easily 4 to 8 inches for a widespread area here, 8 to 12 in the orange. So there's some areas with that as well. And you get into the reds and you're a foot plus, a foot and a half of rain for the mountains, say near Asheville, North Carolina, for example. So it's going to be a ton of rain. And again, as you get higher in elevation, you're going to have gustier winds as well. Now let's take a look at, this is super interesting. So we have the upper wind, the upper air, the upper air winds across the country. And this is current, or actually maybe an hour ago. So we have a big low right now sitting over Kentucky. And then just making it into the frame are the upper level winds of Helene. And then of course we have a dip here in the Pacific Northwest and a big ridge across the country. That's why it's hot in the Southwest and warming up in the plains. So as we go forward in time, we see the upper level winds. Now see, this low is moving slowly southward as the hurricane is racing northward. And then watch them do this little bit of a dance. They kind of do a little do-si-do, and then they form into one low as we get into late in the day tomorrow, or actually this is Saturday. So all of that action happens over the next 24 to 36 hours, and then it becomes one cutoff low for Kentucky. So let's go through that again. We see the low here, and we have a high pressure here, right? So the circulation around the low is like this, the circulation around the high is like this, and that just funnels the hurricane right here. And then as the low sinks southward and the hurricane goes northward and they do their little dance, it's going to pull the hurricane back to the west. And then they form into one low. Super interesting what's going on with these upper level dynamics here. So, and that's one reason why you're going to have so much rain for Tennessee, for Kentucky, for northern Mississippi, for Alabama. It's going to be a long lasting event as far as rainfall goes. And then again, the mountains here are going to be dangerous as far as rain and wind. All right, one more time, I want to show you the rest of the country. So here's the dip in the jet stream up here in the northwest, and then the big ridge of high pressure is where our heat is. And then for the southeast, we have this low, keeping things cool for the northeast. And so we see our high busting now, getting suppressed a little bit. Southwest stays hot, but we see the main jet stream still going into Canada, and then this little dip here for the northeast, keeping things cool, and then our hurricane action. And so this is going to be the story for our forecast, not just for the southeast and not just the devastating effects of Helene, but also for the rest of the country as we go through that forecast for you with today's surface. And yeah, you see the dip in the jet stream up there in the Pacific Northwest, driving a cool front through. And that's where a chance of rain is, northwestern Oregon into western Washington, with a chance of some snow in the northern Cascades, and some cool rain for Idaho into Montana, northwest Montana. Then, of course, the big story, Hurricane Helene making its way towards Florida. Severe thunderstorms possible, much of the Florida peninsula, and along the course, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. We'll show you that map here in just a second. And then the devastatingly heavy rainfall with the stationary front and the low. That's currently the lows in Kentucky, the surface low in Alabama, and it's just going to be a focus for just insane amounts of rain for the southeast. Here's your severe threat today. Landfalling hurricanes tend to spin up tornadoes, and that's going to be the main threat today. But severe weather for the Florida Peninsula and the enhanced risk for the Georgia coast, South Carolina coast, and even parts of Florida down towards Jacksonville. And here is that tornado risk as we zoom in, take a closer look. Your 5% risk is much of Florida and into southeastern Georgia, much of South Carolina, and a little bit of North Carolina. So, your 10% risk, which is insane. It's insanely high risk from Jacksonville, you're included. Myrtle Beach all the way, so we're talking the Georgia coast and the southern half of the South Carolina coast with a very high tornado risk here. The brown is the 5%, and even the green is the 2%. So could see some tornadoes today. I would say that's likely as the hurricane approaches and makes landfall. Now, highs for the rest of the country. It's staying hot in the desert Southwest. 105 again, Tucson. That was, again, broke the record yesterday at 105. So 105 today. 107 Phoenix. 110, what is that, Blythe, California. Needles, somewhere in that area. We're still looking at 90s for the Central California Valley, 70s for the Willamette Valley, some 60s though as you get into Washington, especially with elevation. The plains are warming back up. We have some low to mid 90s. South Dakota, western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, parts of Wyoming. And then lots of 80s for Texas to near 90. 80s here in Iowa, Minnesota, and then back into the 70s as we head into the Midwest. And of course, that's going to be rain cooled in a couple days. And then for the Northeast, that's kind of the big winner with that dip in the jet stream there with highs in the 60s. Lows tomorrow morning, refreshingly cool for the Northwest and for the Rockies. Warming up a little, but still nice in the plains. I mean, it's 46 right now here in western Iowa. Maybe 50 tomorrow morning. So very, very comfortable. Beautiful time of year. And 50s for lows all the way down into Texas. Still hot desert Southwest, starting the day at 82 Phoenix. That's crazy. 60s and 70s for the Southeast to start the day. Mid-Atlantic 70s, and then back into the 60s and then 50s as you head to the Northeast. Surface for tomorrow. So I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is the hurricane is moving quickly as it makes landfall. The bad news is the hurricane is moving quickly as it makes landfall. So let me explain. It's moving fast. So the bad news is it's going to stay a tropical storm all the way to Atlanta. So even though it'll start to weaken once it makes landfall, it's going to be a hurricane in southern Georgia. It's going to be a tropical storm in northern Georgia. And again, those gusty winds are going to be gustier once you get into the mountains. Now, the good news in all this is with a fast-moving system like this, you're going to knock down the rainfall amounts, at least for southern Georgia, because the system is moving faster. If it was going to sit and spin, it would be dumping even more rain. But even though the fast movement, it's still going to be a lot of rain, just not as much as you would if the storm was slow. Now, the storm will be slowing down as it heads into northern Georgia, into Tennessee, into Kentucky. And so it's going to rain a lot, maybe further north than even it would, say, for southern Georgia. So, and there you see our severe weather threat tomorrow, South Carolina and North Carolina. Meanwhile, still cool in Pacific Northwest with some showers or some rain up there. And this is tomorrow's severe. As we zoom in on the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina are slight risk of severe storms. And then the marginal risk gets into Virginia and even parts of Tennessee and Kentucky. And the tornado risk is still here, and it's a 5% risk for lots of North Carolina and a little bit of South Carolina. And the 2% risk, it gets into, again, Virginia, more of South Carolina, a little bit of Tennessee. So tornadoes still a risk for tomorrow, with the landfalling Hurricane Helene that will be devastating for many. All right, tomorrow's highs. A little warmer for Texas. There's a lot of places near 90, low 90s, 93, Roswell. Still very hot for the desert Southwest. Phoenix at 110, what is that, 103 for Las Vegas, 112? 112 in El Centro. That's the city I was trying to think of before. 112 in El Centro. Yikes. Mid-90s, Central California. 70s, Oregon and Washington coasts. 60s, higher elevation. Warming up in the Rockies. So we see a lot of 80s here in the Intermountain West. And into the plains. So less 90s, fewer 90s. There we go. Fewer 90s in the plains, but lots of 80s here. Northern and central plains, and then like I said, going into Texas, turning into near 90. And then there's your rain cooled air around the very heavy rainfall with Helene, 70s and even a few 60s, centered around Memphis and moving outward, so 70s for the Midwest. So, and with 48-hour rainfall, just another look at this, kind of underscore the point, but this is also a regular map that I have in here. So the Pacific Northwest, some fairly good rains for like Vancouver Island, over 2 inches for some areas, maybe 2.5 or 3. As you get into Washington proper, the Olympic Mountains, pretty decent, an inch and a half to 2 inches in isolated spots. But the main event, of course, is our hurricane. We're talking 6, 8, 10, 12 inches. The yellow is going to get you 4 to 6 as it turns orange there. And again, the mountains are going to focus a lot of that rainfall. So a little bit of northern Georgia, the mountains of South Carolina, North Carolina, we're going to be, that's going to be our highest totals. We probably over a foot in some of these areas, but still very heavy rainfall in, Kentucky, Paducah, Kentucky, north of Memphis, still 4 to 6 inches here. So it's going to be a lot. Surface for Saturday, as we take you into the weekend, as we tend to do here at the Weather Mike, forecast always through the weekend. That's our promise. And I think we deliver 90% of the time. I think there was one I didn't do that. But anyway, post-tropical cyclone Helene, which is now merged with that low, as we showed you, is centered over Kentucky, Tennessee. And lots of rain around that system, and it's now a cutoff low, so it's just going to have to rain itself out in the Midwest, in the Tennessee Valley, in parts of the Southeast. So that's going to be our big story as we go through the weekend. I was going to show you, I think I can do that. Let's go back to the European model, and we'll just show you real quickly. Here comes Helene, and again, it looks like it's just making a bullseye right for the Big Bend of Florida as a either category 3 or category 4 hurricane. I think it's probably going to be category 3. Again, the last forecast discussion I read said winds at 115 at landfall. So we'll see. Some forecasts do have it at 130. That would be a category 4. Very devastating either way. So if you're here, get away, go somewhere else, go to Mississippi. And I know people are doing that, and I'm glad. You don't want to be in the path of this storm. So this gets us to tonight. This would be late tonight. Let's make 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock tonight, landfall. And then as we get into, that's midnight, still a hurricane in southern Georgia. You can see all the rain. And then as it moves northward towards Atlanta, this would be Friday early morning as it becomes tropical storm strength, and again, gusty winds in the mountains. Again, friction at the surface, you're still going to have strong winds, but you get away from the friction and you're going to have stronger winds. You can do that even like if you're flying a kite. If you can get your kite above the tree line, then you're going to catch more wind, and that's really how it works. So as you get up into the mountains, less friction for those stronger winds, and so it's going to be windier up here. And this is Friday morning. So it's going to move quickly through Georgia. So again, that's what I was saying. That's the good news, that it's moving quickly. So not as heavy rain, it'll be heavy rain, but for not as long for southern Georgia. And then the storm, will be pulled into the other low, and they'll join forces and become one low as it just starts to rain itself out in western Kentucky, southern Illinois, parts of Indiana, all the way from Arkansas, northern Mississippi, Tennessee, and all of that. And we're still having, this wraparound moisture. So again, the severe weather is going to be on this side of the storm. Craziness. So batten down your hatches if you have them. And of course, we're going to keep you posted on this storm as we go. We'll have an update tomorrow morning, of course. All right, Saturday's highs as we continue your weather forecast through the weekend promise. The Southwest is just too hot. 113 Phoenix, 112 again. El Centro, 111 Lake Havasu. Mid-90s still for the California Central Valleys. We have 90s returning now for the northern plains, 80s for the Central Plains, 80s for Texas. Rain-cooled 70s for the Midwest, into the Tennessee Valley, into the Northeast. Then back to 90s for Florida, and then low to mid 80s for the Central Coast, and then as you head northward, we're back into the 70s for the Northeast. Sunday, let's do that again. Saturday into Sunday, you see a cool off there in the Pacific Northwest. Saturday into Sunday, warming up for the northern plains. Still hot in the Southwest, although a couple degrees cooler, still 80s for Texas. Still 70s, centered around Kentucky into the Midwest. A few 60s for the Northeast, but really a lot of 70s here. That'll get us through the weekend. Again, I don't know what else to say about Helene. We covered it pretty well. And so, obviously, it's going to be a devastating storm. Hopefully, people are getting out of harm's way so that we can have loss of life at a minimum. And landfall late tonight, and then moving quickly through Georgia tomorrow morning. So those are the biggest risks. And then, of course, tornadoes on the east side of the storm. So we'll keep you updated. We'll have another update for you tomorrow, if not sooner. And we really appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in. The Weather Mike. We'll see you soon.